the team you can trust. This is a special presentation of Adam Interviews, Race in Rochester.
Welcome back, everyone. Martin Luther King Day provides an opportunity to reflect on race in America and, for us, race in Rochester. To foster that, we brought in local leaders to explore ways to advance understanding and peace. Adam sat down with them two at a time. His interview with Adrian Hale with the Chamber of Commerce and Rabbi Peter Stein from Temple B'rith Kodesh focused on how to heal after an issue aggravates old wounds.
After we have an event tied to race that really divides the community, what's the first step that you suggest to healing, whether it's at an individual level or at the leadership or community level? Adrian, I'll start with you.
So I think at the individual level, it's about having courageous conversations. And for people in our community who belong to those at-risk subpopulations, letting them know that if you are a part of the majority community, you understand those concerns, the context, the history, and just educating yourself on how to never be a part of the continuation of beliefs, practices, or ways of thinking that can produce these kinds of events.
Rabbi?
I like that very much, and I think when we're confronting hatred, when we're confronting violence, the key really is to speak up and to show up, is to build a connection that makes a difference. Silence is really the concern. Silence is really what's going to cause these kinds of terrible things to continue.
Yeah.
Post-Pittsburgh, what did it mean to you to have that many people show up at B'rith Kodesh?
So it was really a remarkable moment. So there was this terrible tragedy in Pittsburgh, terrible in its own right, just in what happened there in the synagogue, but also terrible because it was continuing a pattern, and it was continuing violence that had happened in churches and in schools and so many other places. And we just had this extraordinary response where there was an incredible cross-section of the community in attendance, people from all different parts of the community, different identities, different affiliations and connections. And it was really just this very powerful statement that no one of us is facing violence alone, no one of us is facing hatred alone, that this is not something we're going to accept in our community.
Right. And Adrian, let's say something happens in the community that has to do with race, a word that's said, an action that was taken, and there appears to be two camps. If someone comes up to you and you have a particular belief as to what was right and what was wrong in that case, and they said, you know, I don't agree with you on what was right or what was wrong, but please know that I understand your frustration behind it, and I believe in that. I just think this particular example wasn't a good example. Is that acceptable to you?
I don't think it's a question of if it's acceptable or not, as much as it's about that particular individual, because I think for some people, understanding is extremely important. And then for some people, the education and the actual persuasion to the person who might understand but not agree is important. I think going back to the abolitionist movement, which we live in the hometown of Frederick Douglass, moral suasion was a huge tool and campaign waged against slavery and the idea that black people were less than. And so what I think is our job to kind of do in moments like this is find the teachable component to say, if you don't agree, why don't you agree? Or why do you have that perspective, and try to unpack some of the biases or preconceived notions that people who don't deal with this on a daily basis may have and not even know it.
Do you think healing is still possible, though, if they don't get to the same conclusion about a certain event?
Absolutely. I mean, one person is going to sow the seed, another person will come along and water it, and then over time in that individual, it will grow. However, I do think it's critical that as a community, we recognize that we have to heal and galvanize and coalesce around our values. To the rabbi's point, when you saw that outpouring of support at your synagogue, that showed you that Rochester was showing you a symbol of condemnation against the acts in Pittsburgh and saying we would never condone an act like that here at home. And so what it's about for other communities, I think, is about showing that we share values and we share principles just from one human being to another. And just letting other folks know that, you know?
And Rabbi, do you think there's a fear, though, that when you say, let's move on, let's heal, some people might say, that's all fine and good, but then we're not going to talk about this one particular event then, because that's going to be a thorn in my side if we try to move on and we don't fully address that.
So I think healing is a much bigger goal than any particular incident. And healing is really challenging a reality that is unacceptable. It's challenging something in the culture or something in the society. And to Adrian, the points that you were just making, we live in such a homogenous world that so many of us live in such segregated, separated ways, whether it's in terms of our racial identity, whether it's in terms of our economic realities, whether it's in terms of other aspects of who we are. Most of us find ourselves living in a very homogenous, very segregated way. And so it then comes to us, if we want to move to healing, to challenge that, to examine and explore, you know, what is my privilege, what is my reality that is not the only reality, and then to enter into those conversations that really expose us to new and different ways of living in this world. And then it doesn't matter if we all agree, but it means that we understand that there's more than one way to look at the world than our own single point of view, that I think too often is reinforced by the people that we surround ourselves with.
Adrian, what have you found success with as you move towards that goal?
So I think for me, it's really been about wanting to constantly, first of all, make people feel safe to be who they are and not kind of, I guess, dress up their beliefs or their point of view, so that there's never this idea or belief that you have to perform a certain way in my company, you know? Because I feel like it's not until people feel comfortable enough to be who they are and kind of express what they think is right or not right, do you have those teachable moments where you can not only grow closer in a relationship, but also closer in our collective goals of becoming a society that more embodies and practices what we declared on paper. So for me, I think that the healing process that we need to just kind of undergo now is, before people reach these conclusions without even, you know, engaging with someone that doesn't look like them or share their worldview, to your point, Rabbi, about us kind of growing up in these monolithic, homogenous environments where everyone thinks the way we do and looks the way we do. I think we need to come ready to learn, suspending our judgment and not listening to respond, but listening to really hear, and ensure that both sides in the conversation is being heard. Because we only move forward when we do that. And just something I find myself telling folks who are angry, and they have a right to be angry, but I always think back to, if our anger doesn't produce progress, if our anger doesn't produce persuasion or the conversion of the way someone thinks or the way they see the world, then what have we really accomplished? And I think that's just kind of been my perspective through this whole situation.
Coming up, Adam's interview continues with ways to elevate the conversation above a particular divisive incident.